Hi, everybody. I'm Diane Poole-Heller, and I'm so glad you're joining us today. I'm really excited to be on with Andrea Battle, who is a licensed professional counselor supervisor in Houston, Texas. And she has another specialty besides being in private practice for 11 years. She's been 3.5 years involved in the Houston CIT program, the Critical Incidents Intervention Response Team. So this is great because mental health is supporting the police efforts, and the police are making things safe so mental health can really be addressed, and they're working closely together. This is a program that's been in existence for 12 years and working well, and she's been involved for 3.5 years. So she's going to enlighten us a little bit about how this collaborative effort is going in Houston, Texas. That might be a good idea for some of you in your areas, or maybe you want to help support the police if you have the right training. Obviously, you have to have the right training. Andrea was introduced to the bottom-up approach through somatic experiencing in 2016, and later added DARE, our dynamic attachment repatterning experience training, in 2020 recently. And she employs these somatic approaches in her part-time private practice and also as part of the interventions that she uses for the Houston Crisis Intervention Response Team that goes by CIRT and often is referred to as CIRT. CIRT's a collaboration between the Harris Center for Mental Health and IDD and the Houston Police Department, and has been in existence for 12 years. And Andrea's been helping them out for the last 3.5. So we're going to take it away and welcome you so much, Andrea.
Thank you. I feel welcome. Thank you.
Yay. And tell us a little bit about what you've been doing with this and how it's been working.
Well, it's really exciting. If someone told me 10 years ago when I got into this field that I'd be wearing a bulletproof vest.
Oh my gosh.
I
Not
would
the typical
say,
therapist apparel, right?
right, not the typical therapist role. I would say, no, that's impossible. But that's actually what I do. I have a police partner. We've been together 3.5 years. And what
Your police partner?
Mm-hmm. And he and I respond to 911 calls that are related to mental health. And so what we then do is we respond, and I as a therapist do an assessment, but he missed his calling as a therapist because he's just as good as I am in terms of working with clients. And we either de-escalate the situation where it's resolved, what they say resolved on scene, where we can leave everyone where they are, or we're making decisions on taking people to the hospital, sometimes involuntary hospitalization.
So would that be like domestic violence or maybe suicidal ideation, or what?
This is suicide. So not that domestic violence cannot occur during a mental health call, but it's primarily someone suicidal, homicidal, or they're decompensating. Often families are calling because they're like, we've kind of been dealing with this on our own and we don't know how to deal with it anymore. We've tried to do this. We don't want the police involved, but we're concerned for their safety or our safety. Or sometimes concerned neighbors are calling saying, hey, these are some of the things I noticed. My neighbor's not the same. They're not eating well. And so they might call 911 as well to do a welfare check. See how
what a wonderful service you guys provide together. That's really beautiful.
Thank you.
And what called you to join CIRT or CIRT?
Well, I'm one of those people that runs towards danger as opposed to running away from danger. So whenever there is a crisis, that's really where I shine. And so the opportunity to do something like this really caught my eye because I'm actually will be able to see the direct fruits of my labor right then and there. And I'm able to keep a cool head in a difficult situation.
That's beautiful. What a wonderful skill to have. And I'm sure it's inspiring to the therapists listening or anybody listening. And yeah, so say maybe a little bit about how the program works or what kind of training might be involved, because there might be some people online that would like to get involved in a similar way, like running towards danger with a safety net of the police officer with you, right?
Right.
And the bulletproof vest.
And the bulletproof vest. So I'm going to talk about it from two perspectives, kind of how the police officers are trained and what's kind of expected from the therapist and their background. With the Houston Police Department, everyone is required upon entering the academy to take a 40-hour mental health course.
Oh, that's good.
That's taught by a licensed professional counselor she's also a police officer. And they're talking about basic mental health first aid. They're describing whether different symptoms of different diagnoses and how it might present itself in a situation where the police are involved. And the idea is to say, do not assume that there's a criminality or criminal action behind this. There might be something else going on. Then after that 40-hour training during the academy, every year they take an 8-hour refresher course. And so I can't remember the exact year, but from a certain point onward, everyone's had that 40-hour training plus the 8-hour refresher. So they're called CIT trained, critical incident training, but they also do patrol work. What's different with CERT is this is what the officers do 100% of the time. And so kind of like CERT is like this elite group, for lack of a better word, where they actually have to interview and demonstrate a certain competency in mental health and know law-wise what does the mental health code permit them to do as officers.
Oh, that's really important.
So that's on the police side. On the therapist side, they're looking for seasoned therapists that are actually okay running towards conflict as opposed to away from conflict, can establish rapport, be quick on their feet. But mostly when I was interviewed, they're like, how do you think you'll do with being with the same person in a car for 40 hours a week? It's just you and that other person, or that person likes it cold, you like it hot, because it's really the partnership that creates the biggest intervention, not just the knowledge that we both bring to the table.
That makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? And I really was struck by you saying that these officers are, that's their whole job, you know, that's their specialty. I think that makes a lot of sense, that instead of just trying to have everybody have some facility with it, you've got specially trained, highly competent, mental health sensitive officers that show that competency, and vice versa, the therapists that show the competency to run towards conflict. That's really beautiful. That makes a lot of sense. And then I was wondering how you're using somatic experiencing, which is a body-based way of doing trauma resolution, and then also more recently the DARE techniques, the attachment relational work, how that might be filtering in to your process with people.
It's really interesting because I think one of the biggest lessons I took away, I mean, there's several, but being the importance of being in my body when I'm showing up on a scene. That I know what's going inside of me, and knowing that that can translate into the relational field with the person. The other piece is attunement, being able to pay attention to, from maybe a DARE perspective, having kind eyes, being at the person's sitting at their level, asking proximity and boundaries. Is it okay? Am I too close? Am I too far away? How does that feel for you right now? Do you mind if I use a lot of invitational language, like courting the reptilian brain? I'd like to invite you to tell me about this. What are your thoughts about that? Gaining permission. Also leading people into, it's like, if I see that they're getting really activated and it's like too much too soon, I'm like, you know, let's slow it down. We have all the time in the world. Take a deep breath, maybe observe your breath. I've asked people to do that before, and say, we are here to help. And it usually just slows everything down and diffuses this high level of activation, because by the time the police are involved, things are pretty kind of out of control. I mean, it's pretty serious situation. And plus you have all these uniformed people around who, I don't carry a gun, but they're carrying guns. And that is anxiety producing, I think, for anybody.
Sure.
And then also developing the rapport, because although I'm not an officer, like I mentioned, the bulletproof vest, I look like one for the most part. And so helping kind of overcome the, yes, this is what I wear, but I'm a therapist and you and I can have this conversation.
That is so beautiful. You're like an actual specialist, both you and your partner, of going into really intense situations and regulating people and grounding them and calming them down, and using somatic experience or DARE and your own brilliance on how to do that face to face. And it must be really fulfilling and very powerful experience for you too.
It is, and Diana, it goes beyond just the actual person that we're working with. It's for the families. And also for the officers themselves. I mean, they do have this 40-hour training during the academy. They do have this once a year 8-hour refresher course. but their anxiety is high too because they have enough sensitivity to know we don't want to do the wrong thing. We
Yeah.
don't want to make it worse. And so we're also bringing their anxiety down, like, no, you did the right thing. You're explaining what the role of CERT is. You're being gentle, and they too kind of start to calm down because it's they want to do the right thing, which is good, and they don't want
Yeah.
to make a mistake.
So you can really feel their positive intention and
Hmm.
their humanness they're bringing to the scene as
Hmm.
well. Yeah.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
it sounds like you have this group support, so it's like whoever you're addressing, their human dignity is honored and respected, and
Yeah.
you're honored and respected by keep being made safe, and you're kind of explaining your role in a way that they can relax with you
Hmm.
potentially. And
Hmm.
yeah, I'd love to
Hmm.
hear some stories if you have some particular situations
Oh,
you'd like to
oh my
share with us.
goodness. I have a titration story,
Great, great.
maybe a little unorthodox. So
And
we
titration just
were
means taking
called to a
baby
scene.
steps for the people that don't know what that means. Just means kind of
Yeah.
taking slow
But,
and small steps. Yes, titration. Great.
so we were called to a scene by a wife of a high school teacher who was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and unfortunately, a parent recently had died to COVID.
Mm,
And he had stopped taking his medication, and he was not motivated to get out of bed. He wasn't eating, but he also wasn't sleeping very well, and he kind of planted himself on the couch and wasn't really engaging at all. Officers had gone prior to try to talk to him, to try to convince him to go voluntarily to the hospital, and he refused. The wife tried to also invite him to go to the hospital. They went, they got frustrated because they weren't seen, and then he said, you know what, I don't want any help, I'm going to go back home. So when I approached him, I sometimes I even take my bulletproof vest off to be more approachable, especially if the scene has already been secured and there aren't any weapons, and I don't, my partner doesn't feel like I would be in danger if I did that. So that's kind of an agreement there. And I asked him, I said, do you mind if I just sit in this chair next to you while you're on the couch? And we did the proximity thing. Does this feel comfortable to you? I asked him a few questions, and then I said, you know what? I think we can help you. We want to help you. Would you like some help? And he said, yes. He said, but I don't want to go. And I said, that's okay. You don't have to want to go. Can we start just by sitting up on the couch? He said, yeah, I think I can do that. I said, how about standing up? I said, I'm not saying get in the car. I'm not saying take a step. I'm just inviting you to stand. And I'll stand with you if that's okay. We did that. I said, okay, let's take a couple of steps forward. I'll go at your pace. And even it took 35 minutes with
wow.
what would be a 2 to 3 minute walk to the car. Because we don't want to handcuff people. We don't want to force people to do something that's not therapeutic. And then the last part of it is once it took 35 minutes to get to the car was actually getting in a car because we're in a police car. It's called a ghost car, so it doesn't have police like blaring
Hmm.
written on it because we want to be as discreet as possible. But in the end, it's still a police car. And so again, saying, hey, let's just look at the seat for a minute. What do you
Oh,
think
that's
about
great.
that? Okay, why don't you put one foot in? Keep your eyes on your wife. Know that she's here to support you and she's going to meet us at the hospital. And eventually he got in the car and it was fine. He got to the hospital. He's doing well now because sometimes we get to hear, not all the time, but sometimes we get to hear afterwards how someone's doing. And so he's doing well. But that was the titration of my life. Let me tell you, it took a lot of
Wow.
patience.
That's really inspirational. That's great. And it worked so beautifully. It's like you were helping him get into his state of readiness, which is
Yes.
such a deep resource. And sometimes it's micro tracking and micro
Mm-hmm.
suggestions. And what a beautiful example. Thank
Mm-hmm.
you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Is there anybody else, any other situation you would like to describe for the therapists listening or people that are interested?
I think there may be an example where I'm working with the family to calm them down. And this is kind of, I know that there's been a little bit talk about sending in social workers by themselves without a police presence, and there's been a push for that. But this, I think, is an example of why I would not be able to do my job unless I had a police presence with me. So this gentleman, someone called 911. He was psychotic. He was running in his neighborhood. He ended up running to his mom's house, but he was running with a machete.
Ooh, ouch.
Yes, he was running with a machete. He had a confrontation with the police. The police did not injure him. They knew that he was mentally ill, which is speaks to their training, that this they did not feel like this was an imminent threat. It was threatening, but they felt something else was going on. He ended up running to his mom's home, and he said that he wanted to die by cop. So
Ooh.
so he was trying to bait the police in doing that, and then ultimately start cutting himself with the machete. So while this is happening, his fiance is like in horror because here are all these officers. She just saw her fiance cut himself with a machete.
Mm.
And she is just like, please do not kill my fiance. And she was hysterical. And I would have been hysterical too to see someone I love in that predicament. And what we did is we did reassurance, and I said, let's just slow this down. Keep your eyes on me. And I just started explaining everything that was about to happen because I knew what was going to happen. They weren't going to kill him because he wanted them to kill him. That wasn't going to happen. And I felt very safe and confident in being able to communicate that with her. I talked to her also about resources. I said, hey, this is real, even naming trauma. This is a traumatic event, observing this. You're going to want to get some support around this. Here are some free resources, the way that you could do it. So doing some education on trauma as well. We eventually were able to get him into custody. He did have to go to the hospital because he had cut himself with a machete, but he was placed in a psychiatric facility. No officers were harmed. He committed self-harm, but no, he wasn't harmed by any officer.
And so the officers were safe, you were safe, the fiance was
Mm-hmm,
safe, and then he was
mm-hmm,
ultimately given the care that he needed.
mm-hmm.
That's another beautiful, and then you were supporting her to make sure she
That's right.
understood that she was being traumatized and
Right, and
yeah,
needed support.
right. Beautiful. It's just such a wonderful liaison between the families and the individuals and the public
Mm-hmm,
and the hospitals and the mental
mm-hmm,
health care that might be available in each person's state. And then the training you have. I mean, just doing such beautiful work. I'm so inspired. That's why I'm so excited that you were willing to talk about this with everybody. I really am inspired. And I'm sure people are thinking, well, how do we find out if that's happening in our state, or would
Sure.
we start something, or how would that happen?
Absolutely. So there's a website, it's citinternational.org, and they actually have a map on their website of all of the CIT programs in the United States. And they also have the liaison if a person would like to start a program, or an organization would like to start a program in their city, on how to go about doing that. They also have a training that can be purchased on, here are the things that you need to be thinking about at a community level, at a law enforcement level, at a mental health perspective, in order to get these programs started. The other piece of it is there's 6 regional training centers where people can directly observe how this has been implemented. Houston actually happens to be one of those cities, so we've been fortunate to be able to have people come and observe and ride with us and see how we're actually interacting with the community and what steps we take after when we're resolving a crisis. But that would be the first place to start.
That's beautiful. And it's so compassionate and so intelligent
Mm-hmm,
how everybody's going about this. And it's like, if some of the funding could go in that direction to really support that coordination between the police
mm-hmm,
and the mental health workers, and then also education on both sides, I just think
mm-hmm,
it's a really beautiful and very much needed, obviously,
mm-hmm.
capacity and forever and always, but especially I think now, I think it's really
Yeah,
beautiful that
particularly
that's
now.
happening. Really beautiful. Well, you're such an inspiration. Is there anything else you'd like to tell us? I just
I
wanted to
would,
pick
yes,
your brain.
I would like to talk to therapists about how they can interact with law enforcement, and then a little bit later talk about how they can talk to their clients about interacting with law enforcement regarding mental health issues. One of the challenges that I've run into is sometimes I get the name and number of the therapist, and I call and they're like, well, I can't talk to you. I said, well, we're kind of in a crisis situation here and we're trying to intervene. So maybe knowing for themselves under which circumstances they would disclose information. Of course, the state licensing board and your training, that all has come into play. But having some conversations too about the client, if there might be a situation when you're in crisis where I might have to disclose, and maybe figuring out ahead of time, how do they actually verify who's calling? Because I get that too. Like anyone can call and say that there is an emergency. So some sort of way to verify in the here and now so that we could get the appropriate information to help the person as best as possible.
Kind of like a password or a question you can answer or something.
Right. They're like,
Yeah.
okay, something ahead of time, planning that ahead
Can
of
you
time.
also ask the client, I imagine, if they're willing to have you discuss things with their support people?
Right. So
If they're willing to do that, yeah.
that is, yes, I forgot to mention that. Yes, ideally we say, hey, can you give us the contact information for your therapist or your psychiatrist? We need to know what medications you're taking, or we want them to inform them that we've had this intervention. If they say yes, that's easy. I mean,
Right.
they call, they put the person on the phone, but sometimes people aren't willing to do that or in a mental state to give consent
Mm-hmm.
at all.
Mm-hmm.
I think the other piece of it is if a therapist is calling and wants the police to intervene, to be keeping in mind that the officers are just as anxious maybe as the therapist at the time making that call because they don't want to do the wrong thing. Is to be really specific as to why you're calling, what the behavior is, because at least in Houston, I can only speak for Houston, if the person has found that they're a danger to themselves or others, or if they're decompensating and need to be placed in involuntary hospitalization, they have to complete paperwork that says things that they've observed or heard from a reliable witness in order to complete that process. So when they're at a loss, they get even more nervous. Like, well, how are we going to do this? How am I going to justify this? But you, as the therapist, can say, this is decompensation is the hardest one for them to take. They get hurting other people and hurting themselves, but saying, these are the reasons why I think this person needs a welfare check and might be a possible candidate, and being very specific, not using any therapist jargon so that it's easily translated to the officer.
Yeah, that's important to not use our psychology code words, our psychobabble, so that they actually understand specifically what the behaviors and what the way it would present. That's really, really helpful.
The same would go if a family member calls 911. It's very important that they're naming the behaviors that they're seeing. So saying things like he's out of control, or he's acting crazy, or she's just destroying property. One gets on alert, like, okay, we might be entering a very dangerous situation here. So kind of like, well, the person is um, making threatening statements, and then you want to clarify, but there are not any weapons in the home, or there are weapons in the home, that sort of thing. But
That's an
being very
important piece of information, obviously, yes.
important piece of information. Another thing that would be helpful for families is to know if they received any mental health history in the past, anything that they could provide the officer again, so he or she can complete that paperwork should the person need to be involuntarily hospitalized.
That's fantastic. That's so helpful. I'm sure, and so the people might have questions. If they call in with questions, they can direct them to help@dianepoolheller.com, and I might pass them on to you if I don't know the answers, so that you can enlighten us with all of your deep experience in this area. But thank you, and all of the people in your program and all the programs across the country.
Thank you for having me.
For this beautiful work. I just really wanted to shine a light on it because I was so inspired by what you were telling me. And I do feel like it's just critical that we have this connection and this dignity and this safety that can be enhanced and strengthened and increased between our communities and our mental health people like yourself and like me, and also our police force that are trying to protect and serve and de-escalate them, because you know, when we get stuck in our threat response, that's not a good place for any of us to be, and we often say things or take actions in a way that isn't great. So it's really beautiful that you're doing multi-level and interwoven de-escalation between the person, the group, the giving information to the referring therapist, the police officers, calming them down. I mean, all of that has got to reap incredibly wonderful and much safer results. And I love the sense of really treating each person with such dignity and
Mm-hmm.
really, you know, the humanness of the approach and how you're implementing it, Andrea. It's really beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
Andrea, I was curious how your partner, I know you hold him in such high regard and you both love your work and you're working together for such a long time. How did he get interested in this work and what pulled him into being so competent with mental health? What happened there?
Well, my partner's been with the police department for 12 years, and 5 of which have been with CERT. And really, the particular area that he was patrolling, he just found himself very comfortable dealing with mental health issues. So whenever there were mental health related calls and the other officers were like, oh, I don't know about this one, he was the one again running towards it, running towards mental health. One of his best stories is that talk about going with the flow and unconditional positive regard is he talked to this woman and able to coax her. She was in the bathroom. She was in a wedding dress. And
Wow.
yeah, she was in a wedding dress. And he was like, hey, I think you need some help and some assistance. Would you be willing to go with me? And she said, yes, as long as I can wear my wedding dress. And he said, okay. So they went to the psychiatric hospital with her in her wedding dress. And he does such a good job that he was a CERT Officer of the Year in 2018 for the
Oh,
entire police
so he
department.
had that honor, CERT
Mhm.
Officer of the Year. Wow.
Mhm.
That's really beautiful. What an honor. That he must really be excellent and what a great person to have as your partner.
Yes, I said you should be a therapist. He's like, oh no, that's way too much school. I'm not going to do that.
He's a natural, as we might say, right?
Yeah.
Really, really fantastic. Oh, I'm so glad that you have such a rich relationship with him. That's somebody that you can really rely on and take into these situations and know you're going to both do the best you can and also often get so many really great results.
Mhm.
And he keeps you safe, which is also really important.
Yes,
Yeah,
he keeps me safe.
yeah. And you keep everybody de-escalated between the two of you and all, I guess, everybody else. Do you usually have more people there than the two of you, or is it usually just the two of you?
No, we usually have other people check by with us, just again for the safety factor. So it's not, sometimes it's just us, but I would say most times there's some other officers there as well.
So there's a whole environment of support. That's great.
Mhm.
Well, wonderful. I'm glad to hear his story. And also, I love the wedding dress story. Was she getting married that day or she just had
No,
an impulse to have her wedding dress on?
she had an impulse. She was psychotic.
Uh-huh.
And she was doing everything in her wedding dress. So that was one of the symptoms. But instead of fighting with her, take that off, the conclusion, like, yeah, why not?
And it's wonderful that you've forged this relationship and you've been spending probably nearly 40 hours or more every week since you've started this, I guess.
Hmm. Hmm.
Anything that you think he would like us to know, or we'll just send appreciation his way as well?
I think he would maybe want to tell other officers that one of the concerns that officers have and often ask him about is what is it like riding with a civilian in the car?
Mm.
Because we don't have our own weapons. We are not going to be able to pull them out of a situation. And then also just practical things like what do they talk about? What do they do?
That's
like
funny.
like we're some foreign creatures or something like that.
Oh,
Um, but he would say that it's just like talking with any other person, but you have to know this is your partner and one of your priorities is to keep them safe. And they're like, okay, so they don't have like 5 heads and they're not, you know, trying to therapize, for lack of a better word, therapize you all the time.
right, or
So
analyze you.
no,
Yeah,
no,
you're not covertly doing therapy with them while they're driving or something.
right. And that they're equally valued,
Yes,
both sides,
yes.
you know.
That's really beautiful. Well, I hope this inspires some people to get involved in this program and also perhaps even like have a way that we can vote for funding if that's what's needed for it to get
Hmm.
implemented in different states or different places. And I imagine it helpful to people from around the world that might be tuning in as well to think about how their countries handle it and how it might be more supportive. So
Hmm.
thank you, thank you, thank you. I really just so appreciate this time with you and that you're
Thank you,
sharing this to
Diane.
our whole group. So um, it's gorgeous work, and I'm so happy that people were brave like you to do this, and also the de-escalation that needs to happen. especially given our country is moving into such polarization, I just think it's a wonderful counter move, to kind of help that not create even more danger, just to
Mhm.
mitigate that as much as we possibly can. So thank you,
Yeah.
my dear.
No, thank you. I'm really honored that you asked me, and I love what I do, and I'm really proud. I'm very, very proud of Houston because I do think we've got it right. And the fact that we're one of 6 regional training centers in the United States, if people want to get a hands-on experience on how it is and interact with the therapists and the officers, and then also the command staff, because we wouldn't be able to have if we didn't have the support of the chief as well. So it's awesome. Anytime you want me to talk about it, I'm more than
Great. I guess that's all for now. And like I said
happy.
before, if people have questions, you can contact us through help@dianepoolheller.com, my name basically. And then Andrea also said that website, that CIT, right?
Mm-hmm. It's citinternational.org.
That's what I wanted to clarify. CITinternational.org for more information. So most of your questions probably can be answered on that website, but we're just really happy to illuminate these possibilities today. So again, thank you, Andrea. Thank you, everyone joining us that took the time to listen in. And I hope this inspires you as much as it inspires me.